Imagine walking through the Marais on a Saturday afternoon, gallery openings, falafel queues on Rue des Rosiers, the particular weekend noise of the most visited neighborhood in Paris, and realizing that the Jewish community you're associating with this place is not the original one. The original one was expunged, not once, 4 times. Medieval Jewish quarter of Paris, its synagogues, its schools, its streets, its cemeteries was systematically destroyed across 2 centuries, and the ground it stood on was redistributed, built over, renamed, and absorbed into a city that preferred not to remember what had been there. Almost nothing marks it. And the story of how it disappeared is not a story of catastrophe. It's a story of policy. Start at Place du Châtelet, the broad plaza north of the Ile de la Cité. Tourist coaches idling, the noise of a major Paris intersection pressing in from every direction. The Grand Châtelet, the fortified tower that stood here until Napoleon had it demolished in 1802 for traffic flow, served for centuries as the administrative and judicial heart of royal Paris. And directly adjacent to it in the 12th and 13th centuries was the densest concentration of Jewish residency in the city, the streets of the old site and the right bank immediately north of the river crossing. This was not a marginal community. The Talmudic Academy established here produced scholars whose influence extended across Europe. Rashi, the most important medieval Jewish commentator, studied in the Rhine Valley, but his students and intellectual descendants were centered in this community, in these streets, right here under the traffic. And the thing to understand about this geography is that it was comprehensively rebuilt twice, first by Philip II August in the late 12th century, then by Haussmann 600 years later. The community was expelled before the first rebuilding. The ground was then rebuilt in a way that erased the street pattern entirely. 2 separate waves of erasure working on the same geography, centuries apart. But before the expulsions, this community had built something here that the city could not simply ignore. Walk onto the Ile de la Cité itself, the Palais de Justice complex, the Sainte-Chapelle courtyard, the administrative buildings that now fill the island's center, and understand that running through this ground was Rue de la Juiverie, the street of the Jews, the named heart of the medieval Jewish quarter. Jewish-owned properties on both sides. A synagogue confirmed in multiple royal and ecclesiastical documents on a site that was later seized and converted into a church. And in 1182, Philip II Auguste, 17 years old, in the first year of his reign, ordered the arrest of all Jews in Paris on a single Saturday morning while they were at prayer. Their property, their assets, the debts owed to them across the Parisian merchant class, all confiscated. They were expelled from the royal domain. The synagogue became a church. Philip kept the debt records and collected the outstanding loans himself. What this expulsion actually was, under the religious language, was fiscal. The Jewish community held significant outstanding loans. Expelling them allowed the crown to cancel the debts, absorb the assets, and take over the lending market in a single operation. It worked economically, politically, and in terms of erasure. The street was renamed. The synagogue became a church. The community returned a decade later to a place that had already been redesigned around their absence. Why Philip readmitted them at all? Hold that, because the answer tells you exactly how this system functioned. Move north from the Cité into the streets of the modern Marais, Rue des Blancs Manteaux, Rue Sainte-Croix de la Bretonnerie, the boutiques and café terraces, and the self-conscious elegance of a neighborhood that knows it's being watched. This right bank area north of the Cité was the secondary concentration of Jewish residency in medieval Paris, the community that rebuilt here after the 1182 expulsion, establishing new properties, a new school, a new social infrastructure in streets that had been peripheral to the original quarter. The name Rue des Blancs Manteaux refers to a mendicant order that established a convent here in the 13th century. on a site that, by some historical readings, was previously Jewish-owned property reassigned after the expulsion. The street's current name is, in a specific sense, a monument to the displacement it records. Medieval Paris street names were extraordinarily literal. Streets were named for their dominant trade or population. The disappearance of streets named for Jewish presence from the Paris street map is itself a document of expulsion history, tracking the community's legal status almost exactly as it changed. And the community that rebuilt in these streets after 1182 would face the same logic again. Now the payoff on Philip's readmission. Walk north along Rue du Temple, a working street, unremarkable, a few older building faces surviving in the upper stories. Philip II Auguste readmitted Jews to Paris in 1198, 16 years after expelling them, and the terms were explicit. Jews could return, own property, operate commercially under new royal regulations, including a direct tax payable to the crown. The 1182 expulsion had removed the Jewish lending market from Paris, and by 1198 the crown had discovered the Parisian credit market was functioning worse without it. The readmission wasn't tolerance, it was a liquidity problem being solved by reversing a policy mistake. The community that returned settled in a slightly different geography, concentrated more heavily around Rue du Temple and the northern Marais. The temple area takes its name from the Knights Templar compound that dominated this part of the right bank. The Jewish community and the Templar institution were neighbors in the 13th century, both operating outside normal municipal jurisdiction, both eventually destroyed by the French crown within a generation of each other. The Jewish cemetery that had served the Paris community for generations was confiscated in 1306 and its land sold. The bones were not moved and the land was built over. The location is known from documentary sources and is unmarked today. Philip IV readmitted Jews to France in 1315, 1 year before his death, again for fiscal reasons, again on extractive terms. The community returned to find its property sold, its institutions gone, its physical infrastructure erased. The final expulsion came in 1394 under Charles VI, and it held for 4 centuries. By the time Haussmann arrived in the 1850s, there was almost nothing left to demolish, because the demolition had already happened across the previous 5 centuries. Haussmann's reconstruction of the Marais was less comprehensive than his work elsewhere. The neighborhood's poverty had preserved more medieval street fabric than wealthier areas. But the streets most directly overlaying the medieval Jewish quarter were among those that were cleared. The double erasure, medieval expulsion policy, then 19th century urban renewal worked in sequence on the same geography. The one physical remnant historians have consistently identified as a possible survival of the medieval Jewish presence is not a building or a street. It is a mikveh, a ritual bath discovered in a basement during renovation work. Its dating is contested. It is not publicly accessible. The most significant material survival of 8 centuries of Jewish presence in medieval Paris is a disputed archaeological feature in a private basement. Come back to Rue des Rosiers on a quiet morning before the queues form. The Hebrew lettering on the shop fronts in the early light. The ordinary Marais stone. The medieval Jewish community of Paris was expulsed 4 times across 2 centuries, each time by a French crown that needed their assets more than their presence. The physical infrastructure they built was confiscated, converted, renamed, and demolished so completely that the community that returned in the late 19th century arrived not as heirs to a continuous tradition, but as new immigrants in a neighborhood where the previous Jewish presence had been erased from the visible record. The erasure was not Haussmann's, it was 7 centuries older. Somewhere under the streets around you, under the boutiques and the cafe tables and the ordinary paving stones of the most visited neighborhood in Paris, there is a cemetery. The medieval community buried their dead here. Philip IV confiscated the land and sold it. The bones were not moved. The city was built on top of them, and it has never stopped being built on top of them. Almost nobody walking these streets knows it.